Thank you. That was incredible to hear how you went about those stories and how they came to you. And I think that your words are something that many journalists do need to hear. And I'm glad to know that this is being recorded and we can share Tanya's words when we leave this room. So we're moving on to our moderated question and answer period now. So that is an opportunity for you audience members who've had questions come up as you've heard Tanya speak. You can line up to one of 3 microphones that we've got in the room. There's one to each side, and we've got one in the middle here. And I'll just start by asking you a little bit more about your second book. And, you know, we found out a lot about how things came together with the first one. Can you share a little bit about how you came to your second?
Yeah, okay. You know, it's actually very much an extension of the first book. It's an extension of the first book, and it's also an extension of my reporting from, from Moose Cree, from about 2010. I remember being there and sitting with Nellie Trapper, this amazing woman who was working at Peakatano, which was is a children's aid service, Indigenous run, the James Bay community of Moose Cree. And I was there writing about suicide in the communities along James Bay, which were, it was incredibly high. And I remember sitting with her and her telling me her story about her son. She worked at the Children's Aid Agency helping people overcome suicide. She helped listening to people. You know, she talked to people. She made herself available. She tried to help as many people as she possibly could. And she went home one day and found her son. And that story stayed with me, you know. And it was always a story, too, that I knew that I would go back to. Not in particular her story, but that story of why is this happening over and over and over again. And, you know, and I was getting that experience, too, in newsrooms where your editor turns to you and says, well, you know, yeah, I'm hearing the stories out of Attawapiskat, but they're looking at it almost like numbers. And I kept saying, you can't. You know, these are kids. These numbers are horrendous. How is this happening? And it again gets back to all those things, those fundamental inequities. Lack of access to doctors in this country. Lack of access to an education. The right of every other child in this country, unless you're First Nations. All of these things. How could this be? So it was a continuation, really.
Mm-hmm. And just because I did hear so much good advice and words for journalists who are either working or up and coming. We do have a lot of students in the room. What more can you say about that responsibility as a journalist to share those stories?
I think that's why we all get into journalism in the first place. Maybe, right? Yeah. Yeah. So we want to tell those stories, and we want to make it. We want to make it better, right? We want to make it different, and you want to tell what you know. You know, like what you've seen and what your family's experienced, and that puts you in a different spot to tell that story. Especially when you see it, and it's being told wrong, right, by everybody else. You kind of want to say, no, actually, that's not really true. You want to get in there and say, well, this is the context. This is what actually happens, and these are the people. I think that we need to always remember that humanity.
Is there one person, one reason, one cause? What got you into wanting to be a journalist?
Oh, that's a very good question. I always wanted to be a writer. You know that again. I talk a lot about sort of feelings inside you. I always felt like I was going to tell stories and be a storyteller. And I would tell that to my parents, and my dad would tell me, why don't you become a pharmaceutical salesman? Because that's what he was. And, you know, he was a Polish, comes from a Polish immigrant family, and this was how he made a living. He made a good living. He had a car. They gave him a car. And they said, you know, you'll get a car. You just go to doctor's offices. You make a good living. And I'd say to him, I want to tell stories. Well, that went over like a lead balloon. And so I fell into journalism at school because I found a way that I could tell stories and get paid for it. Not very well, but get paid for it. You know, you could live off that, and I didn't have to become a pharmaceutical salesman. Nothing's wrong about being a pharmaceutical salesman.
So, you know, over the course of 20 years, I'm wondering if you can reflect back on maybe some of the changes that you've seen in the industry in terms of how mainstream media has covered Indigenous stories.
Mm-hmm. You were talking a bit about this today too, about the stories that influenced you and the changes that you've seen. There's been so many. Mm-hmm. You know, even just even the rise of APTN, right? I mean, and your presence on digitally, your presence on Twitter too. It's so important. So important, right? Getting those stories out there, and there are stories, and it's such a comfort to see too. And
audience, I welcome you, any of you folks out here.
We could keep on blabbing. I think
have
probably.
questions. Yeah, we absolutely could. So you know, don't be shy, because we can definitely have this conversation all night. And don't let me start going on about APTN, because we will be here all night. What question do you have for Tanya?
Out of curiosity, do you still keep in contact with some of the families that you have in terms of the book? And I was wondering if they have a copy of it, if they've read it, and if they would you ever write a follow-up in terms of?
Oh, that's a good question. About the follow-up. Yes, I do keep in touch with the communities and the families, very much so. I was in Poplar Hill First Nation on November 1st. We held a memorial service for Reggie Bushy, and I got to know his brother Ricky quite well, and his other brother Everett as well too. When the book came out, we held instead of holding a book launch, so to speak. You know, people do that. They hold book launches. There's wine, there's cheese, whatever else. That didn't feel right. We wanted to do something in Thunder Bay, and so it was actually it was Ricky's suggestion that we hold a memorial walk, and so that's what we did. And Nan brought down 5 of the families, and they walked with us. They walked from Dennis Franklin Cromartie High School. Somebody put it, of course, on Facebook, the event on Facebook. And so, everybody came. And I was, freaking out, I have to tell you, because I'm not an event planner. And I was trying to figure out how many hams and turkeys and pieces of bannock that I needed for all these people. And then the invitation went out on Facebook. I'm like, oh my gosh, the entire city might show up. Or they might not. Or it could be something else. How's this going to turn out? I was so nervous, and all the kids and the teachers were given the afternoon off, and we walked. We held a memorial walk from DFC, Dennis Franklin, where 6 of the 7 Fallen Feathers went to school, and we held a traditional ceremony down by the water. Everybody was there. Alvin was there, Sam was there, the 5 families were there. Ricky led us on the walk with Norma Kijik, who again is this amazing, powerful woman who's all throughout the book and who sat the inquest every single day. So we've kept in contact. I also went up for Robin Harper's memorial in Keewaywin. I talked to Christian. I talked to the families. Facebook Messenger. Yes, that's what we all use. And so everybody knows all our business, I guess.
Thank you so much for that. We've got another question here.
There's one over there.
Oh,
I'm a little hard to see, so I'll go first.
Sorry about that.
Actually, no worries, no worries. Tanya, I want to ask the question that you suggested, and you said you might offer a willy-nilly answer, which is, after writing the books, do you consider yourself still a journalist, traditional journalist? Are you an activist? And how has writing the books, having written the books, affected your role at the Star?
Thanks for that question. Did I really use the word willy-nilly?
I swear you did. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, oh, that's a good one. I'm a columnist now, so you can have opinions.
Yes.
And that was when I went back to work, I knew that I couldn't go back as a journalist really anymore. I think that, because I do have opinions, and I like to share them. And I think it's important to do that role. Does that make me an activist? No. I'm going to say it doesn't. I'm going to say it still makes me a journalist at my core, because I'm doing what you're doing. We are bringing stories that people didn't listen to before. We're giving voice to those stories and to people that sometimes didn't get that voice. Does that make us activists? How can you not say something to, when you see what's going on right before you? It's sort of your job to stand up and say something.
Thank you.
I am going to have to agree with that 100%. So we will go to your question now. Thank you so much for waiting.
No worries. How's it going? Just kidding, that's not my question.
It's okay.
I get a little nervous. I feel bad for people. It's just my legs shaking. I work up in Sioux Lookout in the summers with the health authority up there. For those of you who don't know, it's like 4 hours about northwest of Thunder Bay. I've worked with students who have died by suicide, and I've stayed up late at night talking to them out of suicide, and I've talked to ones affected by the suicides in their communities. And so I do that. I've done that for the past 3 summers working up there, and I find it really hard to come back to school and to focus. And I know that you've been up there and you go back to Toronto and obviously work, and so I was wondering how you cope or deal with that, and have you just hold those stories. I know that you use your words and writing books, but I'm not a journalism major, and I'm not much of a writer, so I don't really know what to do with it.
I would urge you to talk to people, as much as you can about what you're seeing and what you're feeling. It's important to do that. And also to the people that, and the communities too, that you're talking to and that you now know. That's important too. I keep in contact with everyone really in, everyone that I've gotten to know really well in Thunder Bay. I feel like sometimes it's we're a basket of support to each other, and we all sort of, we talk to each other, even just little things like, hey, how's it going? I talked to Sam Ashley-Penescom, who I call now my elder, because I talk to him all the time, on Facebook. And I've said this before, and it's totally true. It's we don't have to be having big, in-depth conversations about anything. Sometimes he'll send me a GIF about a cat at a typewriter, just to say, hey, how are you? Are you doing okay? Or if he sees me online late at night, I'll get this Facebook message that says, go to bed. It's it's pretty funny, but it's helpful, and it's helpful when I participate and keep involved in the community. Maybe that helps too. I know it helps me. I'm always in Thunder Bay. I'm going to be there on Friday, and I've become good friends with Alvin and Tisa. There's it helps, and the students, and I keep involved with the school, Dennis Franklin Cromartie. Again, many hands, and don't feel that you're alone, because you're not. It's good to reach out and talk to people, and the people that you've got to know.
Thanks.
Thank you for the question, and I got to add to that and say that It would be good for you and for folks who do work close to Indigenous people or in First Nations communities to go to back to your urban centers and talk about what you've seen and the stories that you've heard, whether it's a friend or a stranger on the bus, because you're spreading information and knowledge, and I think that people can learn from the experiences that you've had there and the people that you've talked to there. And whatever way that we can spread the news and the words of what's really going on in the lives of Indigenous people, then it should and it will make for a better society in this country. Because, 20 years we've been at this. And I think that we're seeing probably some of the stories that we would have seen in the start of our careers, and now we're still telling those stories. Maybe we've become cynical in our journalism, at times, but I would encourage that from any individual and all those experiences you're having. So thanks for being brave to come up to the mic and ask your question.
Thank you for that.
And it looks like we've got another one here. Thank you. What's your question for Tanya?
Hi. So I'm Alex, and I was wondering. So I work in the two community in near the Bay James. So in sorry, I'm not a very shy person. So in East Main and Wiscagonish, and I teach science to students there. And so the kids I have in primary school are like, my classes are full, but as soon as you go up in higher grades, my last grade of school I had 2 students, and one was kids from a white teacher that was there, and the other one was there because he was his friend. So my question to you is, since you said that education is an important part, it is an important thing to solve the problem, how would you keep the children in school even if there's school in the communities? Like, because even if there's a school in the community, I don't feel like they are staying in school as much as we would want them to stay in school.
It's a hard one to have a comprehensive answer for, and I don't mean to not answer it by saying this, but you have to reach out to whoever's caring for those children and, talk about the need to go to school and see what's happening with the kids. Like, why are they being that way in class? Find out a little bit more about their families, right, and their circumstances maybe. All those things I was talking about earlier, about the determinants of health and, having a safe house and good food, running water, a parent or somebody who loves you and says they believe in you. Kids need that to grow and to learn. Otherwise, they're not going to be present in your classroom.
I'm going to add to that and say, it could very well be that the home that the kids are in is making them sick. I recently heard from a reporter of mine who was up in Cat Lake, and she spoke to parents, and these parents, their teenage daughter had scars on her face from the mold, the water, the environment she's living in. And it was so bad that she didn't want to go to school. And then it got so bad that she didn't even want to show her own face to her parents. So, all these factors in these communities where our people are from, those are connected, and it could be those factors that result in a kid not going to school. There's probably other reasons other than that, but when you asked about that, that's immediately what I thought about, and and how heartbreaking for a young girl not to want to go to school for that reason.
As an external actor, how do you fix it?
I think that it's more than one person who's going to fix it, and we've heard talks about various levels of government and communities coming together, and that's what it's going to take to fix.
It's not going to be easy.
Yeah,
It's
to fix
fast.
issues like that, and we've been doing these stories for 20 years, so it
Yeah.
might be a while. Yeah, but thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Poria. I have a question for you. What can we do to increase Canadians' awareness of the challenges Indigenous people face, and what can Canadians do to help the Indigenous people, in your opinion?
Want to take that? Deflect.
I'll let you go. I'll let you go first while I gather my thoughts.
What can you do? What can you do to help? Really?
Yes. What are some of your suggestions for what some Canadian people can do?
Okay. Well, right off the bat, do you remember how I was saying that Murray Sinclair said, arm the reasonable, telling people about and learning about what's going on and what has gone on. If you look at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, there is 94 calls to action. And Senator Sinclair has said this before. If every one of us was to take one of those calls of action, and you could read them, and they're not long and onerous. I'm not asking you to read the 700, page, couple volumes of the TRC. Although I would tell you it is really good reading. They've done such a great job. It's beautifully written, and so there's so much in there. But if you go to the 94 calls of action and read them, just like 1 or 2 lines, and see how you can change things, how you can apply one of those to your life. And wouldn't that be a difference that we could all make?
I will briefly add, know the history and pass that knowledge on to your children and the people that you are associated with, and call on the government to make change.
Vote. Informed.
So we have about 5 minutes left, and we've got one question here. So if there are anyone else who is interested in a question, please come up, and we're going to take these last 2 here, it looks like.
Thank you. So my question is for the journalists in the room, everyone in the room, particularly those who are not in the Indigenous reporting class that is offered here on campus. But how do we as journalists bring the important context that you wrote about and that you talked about today to everyday news stories and, effectively the news cycle? I do vet a lot of the stories that we put out at APTN, and there's you want to put like 10 pounds of information into a 5-pound bag when you're doing that. You're gonna want to try to pick the most important pieces of information that you can put into that short news story that you have, and don't forget that you can do follow-ups. And don't forget that you can elaborate with, if you have a TV story, you can broaden it for online and print. So I mean that's just one tool of the trade that I can recommend.
Mm-hmm. It's really good to say you can do follow-ups. Follow-ups are really important to do. You can also write books.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we have our last question of the one. Okay.
Ani Deshnika Zan Seymour Wukamakong Dunjaba. Tanya, I want to give you great applause. Thank you for writing your book. I was very touched by reading your book. I wanted to ask you a question, and my question is in regards to the Independent Police Review. And at the end, it says that they concluded that systemic racism is what it was inquiring about after 2 years. I think in the last part of the sentence it says, racism exists. And it's loud and clear. So we see that throughout Canada today. And when we talk about systemic racism, we think about Angelique Eaglewoman, who had resigned. And then we talk about the Tula Valleys, who resigned from the school in Manitoba. I'm wondering if, I'm sitting here thinking, if that would be something that you would be stirring up next in regards to talking about or addressing systemic racism, because it is so profound today, as we know across Canada. Mm-hmm. And I would love to have a conversation with you.
Get you make wish for your question and for your words. Thank you. You know, systemic racism exists in the police force. You're right, it exists in all of these different places. I meant to talk about this today, but I forgot when I was up there. You know, we see it all over the place, right? And we see it in so many different levels, and it's been there for so long. As we're talking here tonight, Senator Lillian Dick is over in the Senate talking about Bill S3. She is talking about how for the last 150 years under the Indian Act, First Nations women have been treated like second-class citizens. 150 years. And there is a piece of legislation that has been passed by the government that actually has a solution in it, but it got watered down, and now it's up to the government of Canada to decide whether or not they will enact that. Meanwhile, the United Nations Human Rights Committee has gone and looked at Canada, and on January 11th in 2019, they said, Canada, get your act together. Stop discriminating against Indigenous women in this country, as you have been for 150 years. Think about that. How many treaties, or not treaties, how many things have we signed throughout the world? We have a prime minister who says he's a feminist. You know, how many times do we have to hear this? And yet, how incredible is it too that Lillian Dick, who was the very first First Nations female senator appointed in the Senate, is the one standing up saying, let's do something about this, and introducing a motion. You know, we talk about racism, and so when her saying that and saying we need to stop this second-class citizens of women, because what does that look like? We know what that looks like. That looks like women not being seen as equals to their First Nations male counterparts in the government, in bureaucracies, in communities, in relationships. It all trickles down. And then we ask ourselves, why is it Indigenous women are so vulnerable? Why are there so many murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls? That's racism. Down, down, down.
Thank you very much for that. I just wanted to make a comment that I forgot. I wanted to introduce myself as an intergenerational trauma survivor. And my mom is Lavina Corbier from Chiging. And so I'm very proud to say that I am my mom's daughter. But at the same time, I remember in grade 8, I was told from my grade 8 teacher that I would never amount to anything. And I thought that was something that was just said to me. But as a registered social worker, I heard throughout my life that this happens often. So I just want to send a message out there to everyone that we are all not drunken, dirty Indians. And you have to be able to look beyond what you see. And it's just the surface. And although we see a lot of our kids going to school without clothing, and when we have children protection, looking at our homes, it's something that you need to look outside of the box. Because even though we have 12 or 15 people inside of a small home, it doesn't mean that the home is unsafe. So we have to look at different systems and policies. So it's something that we need to look at in regards to what does it look like to look outside of the box. Thank you.
My gosh.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your question, and thanks to everyone who has asked a question here this evening. And thank you all for listening to us, and Tanya, thank you so much for sharing everything with us this evening.
And thank you to Francine.
Thank you
so much for
Thank
sharing
you.
too.
I'm really honored. And I just have to wrap things up for the night, but things are not coming to a complete wrap at the moment. I know you probably do have some questions for Tanya and maybe myself. So we are happy to meet you all out in the atrium. So just exit at one of the 3 doors behind you, and we'll be out there in just a minute. Thanks, everyone.